Welcome to Kanban 101 or Back to Basics. Who's using Kanban here in the room at the moment? Anyone? Oh, so I've got to keep an eye on you people because you're the ones that might be challenging me. Okay? So hopefully by the end of the hour you're going to go away and you've learned a little something, or maybe even just reconfirmed your knowledge. But I welcome questions as well. So feel free to ask me as we go through, or you can always ask me when we get to the end. It's completely up to you guys, or you can catch me over a slice of pizza, but I will be making a B-way for any kind of barbecue, Texas, Domino's chicken, anything like that. Okay, so we'll kick off. So who am I? Who am I exactly? So this is me. My name is Helen Meek, and I actually work for a company called Ripple Rock, and I work for them as an Agile coach and trainer. I also work for Learning Connections as a trainer. So my role really is to work with lots of different organisations, and I've put a few down the side there. And I go in and I either do training, I do coaching, consulting, and that can be actually in the Scrum or in the Kanban experience. And actually for me nowadays, they tend to blur a little bit into one. So most of what I teach is Scrum/Kanban, but not Scrumban. Okay. I also do have a couple of my own meetup groups. I have the Agile Coaching Exchange, so it's another great one that you can have a look at. And I also have the Kanban Coaching Exchange. They're kind of like brothers and sisters. And again, we host them in lots of different venues around London, so have a look at those on Meetup. I do have a lovely glossy badge. I am an accredited Kanban trainer, and this means that I have been poked and prodded by David Anderson himself, metaphorically, not physically. So he's checked to make sure that I have the right information to be able to give to you guys. So I run regular classes, which you're more than welcome to sign up for. Sales pitch over. Okay. So let's get on with it today. Let's have a little look at what Kanban physically is. So where did Kanban come from? So Kanban actually comes from manufacturing back in the 1950s. So, it's a bit of a weird one. How did it get from manufacturing and how did it get into software industry today? So David Anderson, back in about 2004, he was using lots of different agile methods out there, but he was getting a little bit despondent about the Scrum community and what was happening, and he thought maybe there's a better way. So what he did is he started investigating lots more about lean and the manufacturing side of Kanban. So he spent time investigating this, and he started working with something called drum buffer rope. Anyone heard of drum buffer rope before? It's not something that you see a lot out there. So drum buffer rope, the reason why it gets its name, drum, because it's a regular heartbeat, a regular cadence of stuff working. Buffer, because we use buffers in Kanban to work out where our problem points are. And rope, because you can't push a rope, can you? It's a pull system, so drum buffer rope. So back in 2004 in Microsoft, he started using drum buffer rope with a team to see what results he could get and to see if they were actually better than the ones that he was achieving working in an Agile and Scrum way. So he found some great success in this, but it still wasn't what he needed it to be. So he spent a lot of time talking to a guy called Don Reinison. And Don's famous for one of his books about flow, which is excellent, but it's quite complicated to read. So they started to work together, and Don said to David, I think you've actually got a Kanban system there. And that's where Kanban within software industries first got its little chance to see what good we can do to the way that we deliver work. So an interesting fact about Kanban is if I say to you guys, what is the thing that you associate most with it, what would your answer be? The Toyota. What else? You said something? Whip. The most prevalent one is visualization. People mainly focus on the visualization aspect of Kanban. And interestingly, back in 2004, that wasn't one of their main focuses. Visualization in Kanban didn't actually come about until 2007. So that wasn't a primary driver for it. Originally, it was done on the precursor to TFS, Team Foundation Server, and it was all done in spreadsheets and things like that. And it was in 2007 they realized visualization is going to help. So the picture that I like to show here is a Kanban taken from the Toyota production system back back in the 1950s. And the way that this used to work for Toyota is when I'd get to a certain part of like the number of car doors, there would be an indicator, a card that would be in there. And my job as a person who put wheels on, you can imagine it, can't you, would be take this card, put it onto the rack, and then some other little guy, he would come, pull this and know that I need the parts. So this is what their originally Kanban systems look like. And today, we associate the cards that move through the Kanban systems as the Kanban that we use. Okay? So what is Kanban? What do we see going on in this road? What's happening? Tell me. Chaos, weekenders going home. Too many people trying to get through at once. There's way too much capacity or demand on this system, and it exceeds the capacity that it's got on there. So if this was a British road, what would we do? Build another one. Definitely. But building roads is hard, isn't it? Because, you know, it takes a lot of money. We're going to need to get planning permission. I'm probably going to have to close off half the bridge to even do it. Hey, you can probably associate that to actually recruitment in your projects. Oh, we've got too much work on, we can't meet the deadline. Get more people. But they don't account for the fact that you have to recruit, you have to get permission, you have to get the funding, all of these things. So I can actually relate this road to things that I see in the software industry as well. So good idea, we'll expand the road, but it could probably take me 6 to 12 months or to 12 years, depending on what government you're working with, to get the permission for that. So what else could we do? Yeah? Traffic lights. Definitely we could put those in. Anyone from Milton Keynes? We could put in a roundabout, couldn't we? We could probably get a couple on there. So if we're from Milton Keynes, we could probably put a roundabout. All of these things that we put on the British roads, they're there for a reason, aren't they? And that's to help us with flow. We need to keep traffic moving at any given point in time. Even little things like on our motorway, we have now variable speed limits, don't we? So people watch the traffic on a daily basis, and they're altering the speed limits to help flow keep moving. And that's because they understand what the demand on the roads are going to be at any given time, and they change things to try and improve it. So how does this little story relate to Kanban? So Kanban is actually about understanding in your organisation what is the demand you have on your teams. So that is how many projects, how many features, whatever you call them within your teams and your organisations, how much of this stuff have you got going on at any given point in time. Kanban is also about understanding what is your capability. So if you've got all of this work out there, how many teams do we have to feed this through? And typically in organisations, you tend to see teams working on multiple different projects at any given point in time. And actually, we're doing a lot of work out there to try and stop this happening. But in Kanban teams, we're really focused on understanding how much work have you got, do we have the teams to be able to fulfil that? Increasing capability, like I said, the same for the road, is actually quite difficult. So we can't just magic these things up. So increasing the capability can be expensive and it can be lengthy. We need teams to manage flow, and to do that, we need to make sure that we have projects starting and finishing and working together with the teams to deliver high quality results. Now, in Scrum, we have principles and we have practices and we have values, don't we? So we also have the same things in Kanban. Now there's several sets of principles, and I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. The third one is when you start scaling Kanban in your organisation. So I'm just going to cover the first 2. So the service delivery principles are: understand and focus on your customers' needs and expectation. We need to know what it is our customers want, when they're expecting to get it, and how we're going to get it to them. We want to manage the work, and we want to let people self-organise around it. Now this one doesn't really roll off my tongue, but I'll give it a go. Your organisation is an ecosystem of interdependent services steered by its policies, reflect regularly on their effectiveness and improve on them. Okay? So these are words that are given to me by the Lean Kanban University. So these are the principles that they define. So what does that really mean? There's a lot of words there. So it means is you don't have to have feature teams within your organizations. Actually, Kanban advocates that you see a team as a service. So you might have a back end, you might have a front end, you might have a DBA team, you might have a UI team, and these teams can all work independently, and it's about how they work together and flow work all the way through these. So ultimately, your organization would have an ecosystem of different teams within it. Now, to go with these, we also have some change management principles, and these are probably the ones that you're more familiar with. Now, Kanban is what we call the start with what you do now method. So, as a consultant, if you employ me to help you with Kanban, I'm not about changing the way that you work. It's initially. It's about understanding how you are working now. So your organisations have been working for tens, maybe hundreds of years in some instances, and the processes that you've been working with have built up over time, and you've done them for a reason, and we don't want to just discard those in the roles that you have within them. So within Kanban, what we do is we start with what you do now. We want to understand your current processes as you actively practice them. And we're going to respect any existing roles, responsibilities, and job titles. So unlike Scrum, we're not going to come in and say, oh, you need to have Scrum Masters, product owners, and you're just going to be classed as a team now. And the reason why we do this is because it's about behaviours and people. When people come into your organisation and say things have to change, it can set off a trigger in people. Some people will accept it and think, oh, this is really exciting, and other people it will encourage fear within them. So the way we get over that within Kanban is by saying, we're not going to change things, we're going to work together, we're going to look what you do now, and then we're going to see how we can adopt these over time. So your roles and your responsibilities might change, but that's going to be done at the pace that the organisation sets it up. So we're going to gain agreement to pursue improvement through evolutionary change. What does that mean? So all the way through this activity of understanding what you do now, we're going to be finding little pain points. Oh, would it be fantastic if we automated this? Oh, the documentation is quite lengthy and difficult to use. Oh, it'd be great if we had these skills within the team. So we're going to be spotting lots of things all the time, and so it's important that we start acting upon these. And these acts of leadership are going to happen from every single member in the team, everyone in the organisation, and we're all going to need to agree that we're going to pursue and improve over time. So it's now everybody's responsibility, and if you've already got Scrum teams in place, then you've probably already fostered this, but it's about making sure that we raise problems, we find solutions, and we increment them and implement them, and we continually revisit them over time. Now, there's some values that go with this as well, and those values are understanding, respect, agreement, and leadership. So there's some core practices that go with Kanban. There's the visualization. Now, sometimes I go into companies and they say to me, oh yes, we're doing Kanban. We are Kanban. So I take a look at what they're doing, and what I see is a lot of lovely, beautiful, and I love post-it notes, not sponsored by 3M in any way, but I love post-it notes. And so I see these all on the wall and they say to me, yes, Helen, we're doing Kanban. But if I'm going to be really harsh as a trainer, to be a Kanban team, you do physically need to do two things. You need to visualize, check, but you also need to understand the demand and the capability of your organization. And we do that through having WIP limits, work in progress limits, on our Kanban systems. So to call yourself technically Kanban, you need to be doing these two things and obeying those principles. Now, if you still only do these two things, it's what in the Kanban world we called proto-Kanban, or a shallow implementation. And that means you're doing it, but you're only doing the basics, the beginnings of it. So to really call yourselves a true Kanban system and get the full value that you want to get from it, you need to be doing some of the other practices. And that is manage flow, making your policies explicit, and we'll go through these a little bit more in a sec. Implement your feedback loops, improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally, and use scientific models and methods to help you to do that. Okay? So those 6 are the practices of Kanban. Okay? Now, as I said, there is another set of principles which is around scaling. And again, if you have a look on the Lean Kanban University website, you'd be able to have a look at that as well. So the values that go with this lot are flow, collaboration, balance, transparency, and customer focus. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these practices. So the first one is the one that we know the most. This is the visualization aspect. Now, another misconception with companies that I work with is that I'm going to roll up and I'm going to say, ta-da, this is your board that you're going to be using. Okay? Now, because of the first principle, start with what you do now, your board is going to be whatever your working process is at the time. So that might be something like this, or it might be something completely different. Kanban may be used in software, it can be used in, I've done it in marketing campaigns, recruitment campaigns, it can be used absolutely anywhere. So this is something that's going to be specific to your organisation. And what we do is we do an exercise called static, the systems thinking approach to implementing Kanban. That's another classic roll off the tongue. We use something called static to help organisations get to the point where they have a visualisation that they can use. And the important thing is this reflects what your organisation does now, not what you think it does. But if I had to, hedge a bet on what a typical software Kanban system would look like, it would probably look a little something like this. So you've got a number of different things here. You've got lots of columns. We call these columns state columns. These are the states. This is the way that we're going to flow our work through. Now, state columns can also have buffers. Buffers help us because they show us where problems are within our system. True flow systems have no buffers. I have never found one of those, okay, just to manage your expectations. Now, the reason why these are helpful is because typically when I go into companies, there's more developers than there is testers. So the way this helps me is it shows me in this column, in this buffer here, ready to test, it shows me when the developers have done all of their work and all of the testing is waiting for the testers to become available to do it. So buffers are going to show you where there are problems within your system. Now, with your states and with your buffers, you can have swim lanes. Swim lanes help you to show the work. You might have a swim lane for change initiatives. You might have a swim lane for incidents. You might have one for defects, anything that you happen to have in your organisation. You don't have to use swim lanes. You can use different coloured stickies to be able to help you to do that. Whatever's the most important thing for you to visualise, the key is that you do visualise it, and there's a number of ways that you can do it. So there's no right or wrong answer here. The only thing that you need to be mindful of is cards need to move in one direction. So nothing moves backwards, everything moves forwards, okay? So however you build your board, you need to keep that principle in play. Now, things you can see on the board, at the top, I've got explicit policies. Explicit policies are like your definition of done. Everybody got a definition of done? Good, okay. So definition of done, so to move from here to here, these are the things that I needed to have done. To move from here to here, these are the things that I needed to have done. You might have explicit policies on columns, the way you want the columns to work. You might have policies on the way you want cards to behave in your system. But ultimately, you need to call these out. We'll talk about more policies. Now, other things that you might have on your board is you might have visual indicators, you might have avatars with your pictures of your people on. You might have different colours for blockers. Most people tend to do that now. Defects is always an interesting question. So if I've got a one-way system, how do defects work? And the way that typically works in the Kanban world is if my feature happens to have a defect, I'd raise a defect on a separate card, and I normally make that a different colour, and it would go back to the beginning for prioritisation, because you don't always want to work on different defects. And at some point, that will catch up with the rest of the feature, and then we can continue to keep on testing. Okay? So I always make sure it's nice and visible. With your visualization as well, I also have this little thing called a cruise by factor. So as a coach, you want to be able to walk past your board and get a real sense about what is happening here. And if I see lots of defects, there's problems there possibly with quality. If I see lots of blockers, I would know I need to resolve that. So visualizing the problem is absolutely key to understand how the work is behaving, and then what we can do is make some decisions and assumptions on how we're going to solve those as a group of people. Now, other things you might have on your visualization is, you can see I've got this conf column at the end here. And the reason why I tend to put this in, and this is a learning for me, sometimes what happens is, I found a team was getting through lots of work, and I said to them, I'm going to go and take all of these finished features and I'm going to go speak to the business and make sure that they're happy with them. I want to get some feedback from them. And what was happening was, the product owner had their own ambitions and was driving what they wanted forward, and it wasn't actually what the business wanted. So all of the things that we'd fed through, it wasn't what the business wanted, therefore they weren't using it. And to me, that's wasted money. So I put this column here to make sure that the team takes accountability to go and speak to the business to make sure it's exactly what they want and they can feed back in through that way. And then I know that I've got a dysfunction up here with my product owner, and I like to call that a coaching opportunity. Okay. Other things that you might find on my Kanban boards, I've got an abandoned. Again, if I found a team that I had, they were getting through to kind of like test, and then all my features were getting like dropped. Oh, we don't need that anymore, that's not a problem. And again, pound signs popped up in my eyes, because this is all money that we could be spending on valuable things, like the Christmas party and, you know, Easter. So I put in an abandoned column because I can then work out an abandonment rate, and I can work out how much money roughly we're throwing away, and I can then put an improvement in place here, possibly with the product owner, and we call that a coaching opportunity. Okay? Waiting, if you have an ecosystem, if you have multiple different teams all feeding into each other, there's probably a high chance that you're going to be waiting for one of them. Okay? Waiting, you can either leave on your board and you can put a blocker on them, perfectly acceptable, but that'll eat into your whip limit. Some teams I've seen, they've wanted to have something down here. Some have even segregated it further into the different teams they're waiting on. But ultimately, you need to do something with this work. Waiting is bad, it's going to hurt you, so you need to try and solve the problem and find out what that is. Okay? But it's a good indicator. Now, another thing you have with your visualization here is you have some commitment points. Your first commitment point is ready, and that means I'm ready to take this piece of work on. You can agree to stop it, or we can start it now. Your second commitment point is actually at the point where you're ready to say it's done and we can deploy it out the door, because you have a choice to let it out the door or not. On your board, you will also have a start and stop, really, and this is your lead time. Lead time being how long does it take for a piece of work to go through the system. So typically on your board, where you have a ready, your lead time would start here, and once you've deployed it out, then that would be where your lead time stops. And that's how long it takes to do stuff. Now, lead time, cycle time, people change their phrases. I've never been able to find a definitive answer about how people should use it. The key is, whatever you call it, lead time, cycle time, make sure your organisation understands and everybody uses it consistently. Okay? But in Kanban worlds, we do tend to call it lead time, and that's from ready through to deploy. Now, you've also got WIP limits at the top. These are your work in progress limits, and this tells me how much stuff I can have in flight at any given time. Your WIP limit will cover your in progress, your state column, and your buffer at the same time. And the reason why we do this is because we need people to be thinking holistically about the whole system and not just their column. So by having a WIP limit here, if the developer can't do any more work, it gives them sort of like a push to have a look in the system to see if there's anything else that they can help with, or to pick up more work. Okay? So buffers are included within your WIP limit. Now that just reminded me, as I was talking, of something that's also a very important point. When you use your visualization, this part here, test onwards, this is what we call the value part of the board, because this is where all your money is, because you've built it and you've invested it. So before we pick up more stuff from the backlog, we should be, or queue, whatever you call it, we should be asking ourselves, is there anything over here that we can get out of the door first? The mantra with Kanban is, the sooner you finish, the sooner you finish. Okay, so we're not in the business of starting lots of pieces of work and having them all in flight at the same time. We're focused on getting the stuff finished, out of the door, and either getting the feedback or getting the value through monetary or whatever terms, whatever that piece of work is for. Okay, so this part here is the value part. And that's why in Kanban, when we do the daily Kanban, another way of saying daily Scrum, but we call it the daily Kanban, we start from this side of the board. And the daily stand-up, or the daily Kanban, I'm getting confused myself now, you tend to have that more facilitated. You don't do the 3 questions like you do in Scrum. The facilitator of the daily Kanban will say, what do we need to do to get this feature finished? Does anybody need any help? Is there any problems? Can anyone pair here? No? Okay, fine. So what's happening on this? What do we need to do? Can we help? Is a defect? Is that blocker fixed? So it's much more of a facilitated conversation driving from the value side of the board. And then if the team agrees that we're ready to pick up more features, then we do that from the queue or the product backlog. Okay? So that's why we tend to walk that way through. Now, just because it's facilitated, it doesn't mean that you don't get the conversation, because you certainly do, because you're asking people to say, what's going on here? And you quite quickly know if somebody's not doing something because they haven't spoken. So everybody will still get the opportunity to speak in the daily Kanban. And for those that haven't, then it's a good point to say, who doesn't know what they're working on today? What's the next priority thing? So we still have daily Kanbans or daily stand-ups, whatever you want to call them. We still do it around the board. They're still 15 minutes, same time, same place every day, but slightly driven in a different way. So that's visualization. Now, you can also do different things with tickets. You don't have to just build swim lanes, columns, buffers. You can do lots of different things. So you can change colors of tickets, you can put titles, you can put tick boxes if that's going to help you to visualize things, shapes and decorators. I saw this used where a testing team wanted to say well done to the developers because the code that they were doing is absolutely awesome. So they used to put little gold stars on there, and that was a feedback signal to the developers to say, just keep on doing this. Okay? So that's where they used it. It wasn't just some wild idea that I had. You might say if it's high, medium, low priority. If you're doing a physical board, you might also have some way of collecting when you started this piece of work and when you finished this piece of work. So that's a good segue to say, physical board versus electronic board. Pros and cons, it's completely up to you. In Scrum, I would always say 100% get the physical board because it's a heartbeat. In Kanban, I'm going to collect a little bit more data, and it's helpful to me if a system will do that for me. So I tend to use both. So the problems of that is the team will say, oh, well, we don't want to use both. The cost of duplication is really high. Okay? They say that? Have they said that to you? So what I do is I get my stopwatch, and then I say to them, I'm going to time you how long it takes you to update both. And we're talking like 20 seconds maximum. So the value is that I've got an electronic copy, and I've also got a heartbeat that's happening on the wall. Now, once they've tried that excuse to me, they're gonna whine like a bitch about what is the source of truth. Okay? Have they done that to you? What is the source of truth? So you just have to make a decision, and because I'm taking the data out of the online tool, I will always say to them the online tool is a source of truth, but get up and update both at the same time. Okay? So it's really up to you whether you have online or physical boards. Yeah?
What do you do with distributed teams?
Distributed teams, then I would need to have some sort of like online board to collaborate. But I've also had teams where they've wanted to have their own version of the visualization in their team areas. Yeah. So you can do lots of things with different colors. 3M are bringing out lots of different post-it notes all of the time. Again, not sponsored by them in any way, shape or form. I don't advocate any particular tool. They're all getting much better. Lean Kit's pretty good, Kanbanery, Swift Kanban, even TFS, even Jira is getting on the Kanban bandwagon. So, you know, all of these tools are getting better, but they all have their pros and then they all have their cons. Now, the second one is about limiting WIP, work in progress. Now, the reason why we do this is because we want people to swarm on things. We want people to only work on the capacity that they've physically got. As a person, I can only physically do one thing at a time. But I might have another piece of work on the sideline that I'm working with, but I might be asking for some questions. So WIP limits are never 1-to-1. You've probably got like a 1-to-2 ratio because you're always waiting. So we use WIP limits to help people to focus on the work that needs to be done. So the sooner you finish, the sooner you finish. So this encourages swarming. And ideally, this is what we should be doing in Scrum anyway. So WIP limits also help us to flow. It keeps the work moving across the board because we're not waiting around for things. I can only move things across that I've actually physically done and got capacity for. It's going to help pull because I only pull work when I've actually got capacity. It's going to help me to focus on smaller work items because I'm going to be wanting to get these across the board. It's going to focus me on finishing things, and it's going to help me to balance the board. Now, what do I mean by balance the board? Do you remember on my visualization I had my WIP limits at the top and they were pretty much 3-3-3, which tells me I've got a bit of a balanced system. I also gave you an example where I had way more developers than I had testers, which means all of the testing work bottlenecked in the buffer. So that told me I had an imbalanced system. So what you need to do is make sure you have the right ratio, and there's no golden number here of devs, testers, BAs, and it's only through experimentation you're actually going to work out what those numbers are. Okay, but ultimately you're going to need to have work flowing smoothly because waiting time is actually costing you money because people put it down, pick it up, they look, they send reminders, no, it's not ready. So every time you do that, it costs the organisation or the client or whoever money to do so. So it's important that we make sure that they flow. It's important also that we stop people multitasking on stuff. I think the most projects I found one person working on was 15. I have no idea when he went to the toilet, okay? So he possibly couldn't have been working on that many. I don't know how he found that. But we know that the book by Gerald Weinberg talks about every time you context switch between projects or work, 20% of the total effort is lost on that context switch. Okay? So again, we're mindful of that in Kanban because we want to stop multitasking and only get people working on the stuff that they've got capacity for. Now, in Kanban, we also use something called Little's Law. Now, when we looked at our visualization, I introduced the fact that we have lead time. So how long does a piece of work take to complete the system? Now, we also introduced our WIP limits. So how many pieces of work can we have in flight at any given time? Now, the project managers in the room are probably also thinking in the back of their minds, when are we going to get this piece of work done? Okay. So I like to use Little's Law, and Little's Law was actually created by a guy called Philip Norse, but he didn't prove it in his lifetime. You can Google it, but the Google page is like super complicated unless you've got like a maths PhD. So it's probably best not to do that. But Little's Law is really helpful because it tells us about a relationship between a number of things. And that relationship is, if we want to improve the delivery rate, if we want to improve how much the team is getting through on a regular basis, we need to change one of two factors. We can either change the work in progress or we can change the lead time. To change the lead time, we have to improve the process that people work within. So you did manual testing, you now do automated testing, that's to reduce the time it takes to do stuff, okay? So this is about process improvement if you're gonna reduce this here, okay? Now, work in progress, this is how many pieces of work each person has in flight at any given point in time. So most people would say, well, we'll just give people more work, yeah? But actually, Little's Law tells me that this has a negative impact because if you increase the work in progress per person, but you don't decrease the lead time, your delivery rate will actually suffer because people are waiting around for things more because they don't have the capability to do it. So if you want to change your throughput rate by changing your work in progress, you have to add more people to the team, okay? So this is great because it helps me to have conversations with managers or whoever about the relationship between these things. If we want to improve how much the work is getting done by the team, we either have to improve stuff, we have to get more people to come in and help us, okay? Now, there's a few considerations with Little Laws. You have to have a stable system. So what does that mean? It means ultimately you shouldn't have things waiting around for long periods of time. The arrival rate of work coming in and the arrival rate of work getting deployed or finished or done, whatever, needs to be about roughly the same. Okay? So there's lots of really good literature out there, and this is a really useful calculation to have because we can also use this to help to try and forecast how long we think stuff is going to take to get done. But again, there's caveats around that, which we won't cover today, but investigate Little's Law. It is something that is really interesting. So we can use Little's Law to also help to define what our WIP limits should be. So if I know when my project end date is, so I know how many cards I need to get through a week, if I know that, if I know what my lead time is in my team, I can work out what my WIP limits need to be, and that equals how many people I need to have on the project. Okay? So that's how it can help us. Alternatively, when setting your WIP limits, you can just have a guess. Okay? If you haven't got that information, which many teams haven't, you can have a guess at this. So do you remember I said my WIP is probably 2 pieces? Okay? So give me 2 pieces of work as my WIP limit. If you've got 10 people in the team, you give them 2. That's a WIP of 20 that you've got to spread throughout the board wherever they have to do some work. Okay? Now, there's a few exceptions, because there's exceptions with everything in life, and that is when I'm working with application support teams, you find out that they're probably working on lots and lots of tickets at the same time. So I have been known to increase WIP limits for application support from between 5 and 7. But ultimately, as a person who's responsible for that Kanban team, I'm going to be trying to find out all of the different ways that I can stop waiting around for people to either respond to emails or answer the questions that I've got. Because quite often people are like, oh, this is really urgent, you have to do it now, and then they go away for 2 weeks on holiday and you have to wait around for it, and therefore it eats into your WIP limit and it costs you money because your lead time's getting bigger. Okay? So as a Kanban master, or whatever my job title happens to be, I'm going to be trying to find a way of solving that problem so my people aren't waiting and therefore I can reduce the WIP limits. Start with whatever you think is appropriate and reduce them gradually over time. And the way that you're going to know if your WIP limits are high or low is because you're going to see it happening on the board. If you have lots of bottlenecks, lots of work building up, that's a problem. If you have lots of columns on your board, state columns that are empty, that's starvation. That means we haven't got enough work. That's a symptom of another problem. If you have lots of things in waiting or blocked, again, that's a symptom of a problem that we have to solve. Okay? So start with what you think your WIP limits would be and gradually reduce them over time, and do that through improving the system that you work within. So practice 3, manage flow. Manage flow is about how are we doing. In Kanban, we don't have a cadence being a time box iteration, we don't have that. Work continually flows through the team. So we need to have a way of understanding what is happening. So we use something called the cumulative flow, and this is really good in Scrum teams as well. And the cumulative flow effectively will represent the different columns that you have on your board. So these will represent the different states: to do, design, build, done, test. And this will show you what work is flowing. So the green represents the done, the to do is my queue here and it's the yellow, and everything else in the middle that is in flight. Now these, has everybody heard of Aquafresh toothpaste? Yeah, the thin minty stripe. Ultimately, that's what your CFD should look like, okay? Nice, equal, thin, minty stripes that move in an upward direction to the right, okay? If someone stood on the tube and it's all gone crazy, a bit like your WIP limits, it's all gone crazy. So how do I know how thick these should be? If you've got a WIP of 5 in your development, then the distance between your, I don't know which one it is, the distance between here will be 5. So if you've breached your WIP limits, then the section will get bigger. So you can see here, it's not a thin, consistent line, it's physically got bigger. These don't tell you the secrets to everything that's going on in your project, but it's going to give you an indicator of what is happening to the work. So ultimately, they need to be nice, equal lines, but if they start expanding like this, then it's a symptom of a problem that we need to solve. Now, another reason why these are helpful for Kanban teams is because these will also give us an indicator about what our lead time and what our WIP is at any given point in time. So I can have a look on this chart, and the distance between here and here is my lead time, and the distance from between here and here is the total WIP. So I can work out, however many years I happen to have this, how my throughput rate has changed using Little's law over time. Important thing is, these are approximate, but that's good enough for us to be able to have a conversation about, are we improving? These are also good because sometimes you see massive changes in them, and that's a signal to say that you've done something differently within the team. So if you put an improvement in place and you see a change to the better and it looks like Aquafresh, then that's a sign that you have done really good things. Okay, so CFDs, awesome, get one. Scrum team or Kanban team. Now, in Kanban, another one of our core charts is the lead time distribution chart. So what does this tell us? This tells us how many cards have gone through the system and how long has that took. So number of cards and the lead time on here. And the reason why we collect this is because in Kanban, we work off lead times, and that's how we communicate to our customers. We don't use story points. However, start with what you do now. If you use them now, you'll start to use them when you first do Kanban. But ultimately, as you progress and you mature in Kanban, you'll find there'll become a less of a need for story points because you use your lead time and other calculations to help you to understand when your stuff is going to get done. So this tells me, for example, that 16 cards had a lead time of 4 days, 6 cards had a lead time of 5 days, and I can start to gather information on here. Now, ultimately, what I'm looking for is really short lead times, because we want to get stuff to our customers quicker. And the way that we move things from long lead times to short lead times is by improving the process. Okay? That's the process improvement. It's also about removing the blockers. Once we have this chart, we can start using this to have a conversation with our customer about, did you know, Helen, when your ticket gets priority, you are going to get that in maybe 5 days or less. And the reason why we can do this is because we can plot a distribution on this chart. Now, a guy called Troy McGuinness, anyone heard of Troy McGuinness? No? Troy McGuinness is a statistician who works within the Kanban industry, and he collects data from thousands and thousands of different organisations, and he models them. He's been pioneering the use of Monte Carlo within software industry. Anyone heard of Monte Carlo? Yeah? Monte Carlo is now how, and this is my trash TV alert when I sat on the sofa the other day, Monte Carlo can help the police force predict within a 3-street radius when the next and where the next burglary is going to happen. And it does this by modelling data. So we collect all of this different information here, and the way that your projects get delivered and how the cards go through the system, and you can plug it into lots of different methods out there, mainly Monte Carlo, and Troy McGuinness has helped to do that, and that can help to forecast your project. Okay, so again, I'm not going to talk about that in detail, but if that's something of interest to you, look him up. He's got lots of really good free tools. So with this, Troy tells me that pretty much all of the time, we don't see a bell curve distribution on this. What we actually see is something called a viable distribution, W-E-I-B-U-L-L, okay? And that means, in my world, it's big up here, and then it tails off at the end, okay? And interestingly, one of my teams working with ASOS at the moment, I plugged in their data, had no idea what it was going to look like, and it actually did look like a viable distribution, so I have validated his work, years of it. Okay, so with this distribution, we can stop talking to our customers and say, on average, you're going to get it on this date. If someone said to me, Helen, you've got a 50% chance of getting your kitchen fitted on Saturday, I would not be very happy, would I? So customers aren't going to be very happy to hear that they've only got a 50% chance of getting this piece of work done on their deadline. So what we use with the viable distribution is we talk about something called the 85th percentile or the 95th percentile, depending on your attitude to risk. So using this lead time distribution chart, and by modelling a viable distribution on it, we can work out where your 85th percentile is. So what lead time Have you been hitting 85% of the time? And therefore, that's a really good message to give to your customers. Okay? So that's a really useful chart. Lots of maths you would think behind this, but to create these, all you need is when your piece of work started and when your piece of work finished. And then you can work out all of this lovely information based upon those two things. And you can do that in Scrum teams as well as Kanban teams. The other thing we use is a process flow diagram, probably the least used chart within Kanban, and it's based upon Six Sigma, and this is probably manufacturing routes, but it basically talks about stuff that's in control is in the middle, so a healthy lead time, stuff that's above and stuff that's below. These are the things that are causing work to take long periods of time, and therefore we need to do something about it. These are the things that we need to have retrospectives about and tackle the problems for it. Yeah? We also have in Kanban something called flow efficiency. Be careful with this one. This is probably an advanced practice, but flow efficiency looks at how are things moving across your board. So if you have lots of things waiting or blocked, then your flow efficiency will be relatively low. The quicker things move from column to column, the better your flow efficiency will be. And there's a calculation that helps you to work out what that is. But the reason why I'm very mindful of this is because flow efficiency is typically between 1% and 5%, and that's really low, especially if you're going to tell your CTO or your CEO that, oh yeah, we're flow efficient 5%, okay? I've never seen a team at 40%, but David Anderson has seen a team, so I trust his word for that. So this is useful information to understand how long things have been waiting, but just be careful with it because it could set off a little nuclear reactor within your organisation. And I speak from experience there. Kanban Waste. So hopefully in Scrum you would have heard of Mary and Tom Poppendike and the 7 categories of waste. If not, look it up. But in Kanban, we use something called transaction cost, coordination cost, and failure load. So transaction cost is me painting my fence at the weekend, and the value is me actually physically painting. The waste in that is me going to B&Q, buying the paint, cleaning up my brushes, and putting on my overalls. Okay? So the transaction of doing my work. Coordination cost is when I was having to do a training session to Manila the other day, and I had an hour, and I spent the first 20 minutes trying to get Skype to work. Okay, so that's a coordination cost. Failure load is those things that have gone through your team, and it's not what the person wanted, or it didn't fix the problem. These are the problems that have come back through, and we're having to fix it again, and that's waste. So again, in Kanban, we look for all of these different things. Now, policies, our fourth one, we talked a little bit about these on the board. Ultimately, these are your definition of done. So make sure that whatever you do, you put them on your columns, your swim lanes, your cards, your queues, anything that you might want to define how it works. Discuss it with your teams, agree it, revisit it regularly, make sure it's extremely visible, put it on your board, don't just hide it away, okay? But these are going to define how work is controlled. And these help us if we have people joining or leaving the team, they can then see how it is that we expect people to behave within it. So I would have these all over the different place, giving us clues and indicators in the way that we physically want to work. So your definition of done. The fifth practice, feedback loops. So feedback loops are important. So Kanban doesn't talk about a retrospective, but we know retrospectives are really important because it's about the team coming together and having a conversation about how we're working as a group of people, process improvements, or anything that could possibly be affecting the way that we work. So definitely still have them. With Kanban, you might not necessarily have 2-week or 3-week iterations, but for retrospectives, just pick a time frame that you want to use. So 2 weeks is pretty reasonable. So you have your retrospectives, and that's a great way of getting feedback. You also have your visualization on the wall. That's a great way to get feedback. You can do ad hoc retrospections. So if you have a problem, you can get people to huddle for, say, 15 minutes and talk about that problem. Whenever you see things ad hoc, don't wait for the 2 weeks. Waste data and chart data, all of these are going to give you feedback about what is happening and what we need to improve. So hopefully you've realised that Kanban is about improving the way that we work as teams. It's about looking at what we do now, finding all of the problems, working out how long it takes us to do stuff, and gradually reducing that over time through process improvement. So sometimes when I go to organisations, they say, oh yeah, Kanban's not working for us. That's because they've never changed nothing. They've still got the first board, which represents their waterfall way of working 6 months later. I sometimes have teams that don't continuously improve and then wonder why it's not helping them. These are the things that you need to improve. And as a team, you need to take accountability for that and make time for it. And so these feedback loops are still really, really important. So don't forget you've got managers, and ideally you would have a coach within your organisation who can help you find challenges and give you encouragement and help you solve problems to reduce your lead time. You also have feedback between teams. If somebody else is doing something really good, go and have a look at it, copy it, adapt it, flex it for your way of working. I'm currently back with ASOS at the moment, and I have 41 teams there. That's an amazing number of teams for one person. But they're all doing really good things, but they never talk to each other. So no one ever knows what, who's good at what and what people have tried and what they haven't done. So we now have a community of practice where I get all of these people together on a regular basis, and we share and we say what's worked and what we're ashamed of, but we want to celebrate the failure of. All of these good things come out during a community of practice. So that's a really good thing to do, especially if you've got a scaled organisation. A great lady called Emily Webber wrote a Communities of Practice book, if that's something that you're interested in learning more about. Invite other people to come and have a look at what you're doing. If you haven't got coaches, get other people to come and look at your board, see what it tells them. Maybe get somebody else to come in and facilitate your retrospective so you can get involved with the team and they can help to pull out some of the things that maybe you haven't noticed. Don't forget your product managers, product owners, whatever you call them. These guys are great at giving feedback as well through reviews. You might still have reviews initially. You might then move to more ad hoc ones when it hits your review column. Get feedback from them. Also, ad hoc demos. If you've got something done, show it. Don't just wait for 2 weeks. So ultimately, seek feedback. Feedback is our friend. Data is also our friend in Kanban. Seek all of this all over the way that you work, collect it up, and then do stuff about it. Make sure you also bank it. There's nothing worse than teams raising lots of things in retrospectives and then us just disregarding them at the end of the hour. Build an improvement backlog. See how that can help you. Flow things through. Tackle the low-hanging fruit yourself. All of these things are going to help improve the lead times of the team. Now, the final practice, you're probably pleased to get to this one. Is she ever going to stop speaking? So the final practice is improve collaboratively using scientific models and methods. So what does this mean? This is linked to the retrospective or the ad hoc retrospection or whatever feedback loop you happen to have in place. And what this asks you to do is just be a little bit more scientific in the changes that you're making. And so set a hypothesis of what you think is going to happen if you make a change. Set the hypothesis, say what you're going to do about it, give yourself some time, look back, measure it and see if it's had an improvement. And you can tell that through all of your different charts that you've got. So the scientific models and methods, these are the things that can help you. So you have got A3 thinking. So this comes from Toyota. And this is probably one of my favourite ones. And quite often I get the team just to put the conditions on here and we stick them on the wall. So that's a great way of setting a hypothesis. You've also got something called Discovery Kanban by a guy called Patrick Steyart. So again, worthwhile investigating. He came up with little mini Kanban boards that help you to flow changes. You've also got Inspect and Adapt. So where does Inspect and Adapt come from? It's an agile thing. Fail. You've also got define, measure, analyze, improve, control. You've got process of ongoing improvement. You can use Cynefin to help you to do things. You've also got systems thinking, plan, do, check, act. There's oodles of them out there, and they're worthwhile investigating and seeing which one works for you. As I said, my favourite one is this, primarily because you can just print a copy of this off the internet, give it to your teams, and then they go wild in the aisles. Okay? But ultimately, make sure that you go back and you validate. Another tip is don't make too many changes at once, because if something succeeds and something fails, you don't know which one it is. So focus your improvements in targeted areas. Look for the biggest problem that you've got, tackle that first, see what the outcome of that change is, and then make a decision about what the next thing is that you're going to tackle. Because the second thing may not be the second thing after you've solved the first problem. Always look for the biggest thing and solve it. So ultimately, whatever you do with Kanban, you're going to start with what you do now. You're going to build some form of visualization by maybe running a static workshop, static being systems thinking approach to implementing Kanban. Whew. Then you're going to have something that you can start to use, okay? And that's going to change, and I expect it to change. So don't worry about that. Where you start off and where you finish are probably going to be two different places. But it's the journey that you go and the learnings that you have on the way that's going to help you to make a kick-ass team. Okay, so you're going to evolve over time. And you're going to make mistakes, and that is absolutely fine. Fail fast, learn from it, and then put your next improvement in place. And gradually over time, you probably will change your processes. Over time, you probably will change the roles that you have within teams and in the organisation. And that's okay, but you do that at your own pace without putting fear and worry into people, therefore making the change culture hard. So they are the 6 practices of Kanban. There's lots of information there to give you, and I know there's a lot to take in, and there's a lot more information underneath all of this, okay? So where can you go to get more information? So meetups, fantastic place to get lots of really free information, okay? So there's another one out there called the Limited Whip Society, run by a guy called Nada. So that's a great place to go to, and obviously you've got both of mine. There's also the Kanban community on Twitter. We're always very giving and answering things. You've got DevOps, Kanban dev groups and Yahoo groups. You've got LinkedIn group. There's lots of places where you can get information all over the place. You can always write to me, and I will always help you and give you information, okay? Another option you have got, shameless plug too, is certified Kanban training, okay? So that's another good way to get information. If you love a good book, here are some of my top recommendations. Kanban, the original blue book by David J. Anderson. You've also got Kanban from the Inside, which is the one that Ahmad is actually going to be giving away tonight, so fill in your feedback forms and don't forget to say I'm awesome. So that's a great book, it's probably a more recent one. They've also just recently released a free essential Kanban guide written by a guy called Andy Carmichael along with David Anderson. Good, download it now. You can give it to your teams. It's really thin. It's like the equivalent of the Scrum guide. You've also got Scrumban. That's another great book by Corey Laddis. Scrumban, hopefully you'll all know, is actually a transitionary state and not a method in itself. It's about teams that move from Scrum to Kanban. And it's okay to stay in the middle. But, you know, it talks about that. And finally, another great book is The Goal. And the IT equivalent of that is the Phoenix Project. Anyone read the Phoenix Project? Yeah. Okay. Anyone read The Goal? Okay, just Mahindra. So for me, The Goal is an awesome book because it talks about a guy who runs a factory who's managed and measured by lovely accountants who set guides and goals, and actually the business is going to run out of money and collapse. And this talks about how he uses a method to help him to understand where all of the different problems are. And that method is part of what gives the history to Kanban. Okay? So you can read one about IT or you can read one about manufacturing, but this is my favorite one because this is the original. And if you read it, you would be able to relate to it. And also, it's written as a novel, so it's super easy to read. Okay? So The Goal or the Phoenix Project. All great books to have a look at to be able to help you on your journey.